Welcome to early modern Europe, 1500s to 1700s. This is Melinda Klein. Between the Renaissance of the late Middle Ages and industrialization of the 18th century and 19th century, Europe would change in many ways. Commercial endeavors would make European nations wealthy on trade and raw materials produced from slave labor for the British, Dutch, Portuguese, Spanish, and the French. At the same time, trade by merchants developed a middle-class society that would take form in various ways, and societies would question, protest, and wage war against tyrants and some rulers. The impact of new foods from the Americas not only pleased the European palate, but led to dependency on new starches, creating overpopulation. Overall, Europe was transformed during the colonial period in diverse ways. By the end of the 16th century, scholars reflected on their accomplishments by encompassing the last 200 years in which learning and intellectual achievements embraced the ancient texts. In addition, during this age, the world had become a new society, hallmarked by technological innovations such as book printing and the use of marine compass that made voyages far from the sight of land more accurate. Meanwhile, Germans perfected the cannon, the Iberians, the Spanish and Portuguese, sailed to the Americas and around the globe. The exchange of plants and animals transformed European, American, African, and Asian ways of life. Foods that had never been seen before by some peoples became staples as new growing seasons opened up for crops. For example, before 1492, no potatoes were grown outside of South America. The Italians did not have tomatoes until they became available through trade as well. By the 1800s, Ireland became so dependent on the potato that a disease-based crop led to the devastation known as the Irish potato famine mid-19th century. The Little Ice Age brought bitterly cold winds to many parts of the world, along with shorter growing seasons, but it is most thoroughly documented in Europe and North America. The Dutch East India Company was established on March 20th, 1602, when the Estates General of the Netherlands granted it a 20-year monopoly to carry out colonial activities in Asia. The Dutch East India Company became the largest commercial enterprise in the 17th century world. Spices were important to European trade and purchased in bulk, bringing in huge profits for the company. 17th century Amsterdam was a place of religious tolerance, and merchants, not the nobility, were the wealthy patrons to the arts, sciences, and provided funds for the exploration to and trade with African and Asian ports of call. France and England by 1600 had formed strong central state governments. The 17th century is called the century of absolute monarchs. This rise of intolerance by monarchs to support and guidance by state officials was promoted by a Renaissance text written by Machiavelli called The Prince. The divine right of kings is a European political and religious doctrine. It states that a monarch owes his rule to the will of God, not to the will of his subjects, parliament, the aristocracy, or any other competing authority. In England, by the 1640s, a civil war erupted between Parliament and their king, Charles I. The king had his army and Parliament had theirs. By 1649, Parliament was ultimately victorious. To to exercise their newfound political authority, Parliament put their king on trial for treason against the state and its citizens for abusing his power and causing tyranny. The idea of liberty and freedom from tyrannical rule was won by the parliamentary army and Cromwell on the same principles for which the British colonists would argue in the 1770s, because it seems that a tyrannical parliament was abusing its colonists in North America with arbitrary taxes without asking their consent. The Holy Roman Empire was a legacy of the Roman Empire. However, this was a German empire. It was united politically during the Middle Ages in the 14th century, emerging from dissolved kingdoms of the Franks. The Holy Roman Empire lasted almost 1,000 years, ending in 1806 with the coming of Napoleon and his invasion. A part of the Holy Roman Empire was Austria, ruled for 300 years by the Habsburg dynasty until the end of World War I. At times, the Habsburg Empire was so powerful they ruled over more than half of Europe. Over time, however, they lost lands to the Ottoman Turks and princes of Transylvania. At other times, they controlled over Tuscany and northern Italy, Sardinia, Belgium, Luxembourg, Serbia, parts of Poland, Bosnia, and Czechoslovakia. With a series of treaties by 1648, we know collectively as the Treaty of Westphalia, this officially ended the 80 years between the Holy Roman Empire's war against France and Spain. Regardless of the time period, this is remembered as the 30-Year War that ended in the Low Countries, freeing Holland from Spanish rule. In 1648, this began the modern era in Europe. Germany would not be united again as a country, nation, or empire until the coming of Prussian Wilhelm I and his right-hand military man Otto von Bismarck in 1871, unifying Germany at that point. New ways of thinking about the heavens played more of a role in secularization of society than did new technologies. Groundbreaking at this time were the celestial theories of Galileo in Italy. He used mathematics, not biblical interpretation, to explain the natural laws of the world and planetary motion. In England, scientific thought was not kept in check by Catholic priests. Here, such minds such as Sir Isaac Newton could think and profess his theory of natural law that became known as the law of gravity. Early modern societies were fearful not only of the coming of bad harvests, but of each other. Estimates of witchcraft executions range from about 40 to 100,000 in Europe. Like people in other parts of the world, Europeans held on to their pagan beliefs, while outwardly claiming Christianity. Superstitions surrounding sin and evil prevailed. In England, Parliament from about the 1500s practiced new land management techniques by enclosing common lands used by town and village people throughout Britain. This led to thousands of Irish, Scottish, and English people in search of work and a livelihood to towns and cities far from home. Replacing the common farming system in use since the demise of feudalism was considered old-fashioned and ineffective because the working poor paid very little in the way of taxes anyway.